When did your entire class unite against a teacher? I was in English class when I grabbed my inhaler. Ms. Grant snatched it out of my hand. What do you think you're doing? We just came back from PE class, I wheezed. Asthma is psychological. She walked around and collected inhalers from me, Marcus, and Lily. When I was your age, my parents cured my fake breathing problems by making me run 5 miles. Now I'm doing the same for you. Katie shot up from her desk. Ms. Grant, I've seen her have attacks before. Sit down or you're getting detention. She locked all 3 inhalers in the med cabinet and pocketed the key. I had 20 minutes before I'd stop breathing for good. That's when she grabbed her heavy wooden desk, dragged it in front of the door, and sat on it. Nobody leaves until you 3 admit you're faking. Sarah raised her hand. But what if they're not faking? They are. Marcus was already turning red. Lily clutched her chest. It felt like someone was inflating a balloon inside me, squeezing out all the space where air should go. That's when my golden child twin brother Jake opened his stupid mouth. She's such a drama queen. Last year she faked an asthma attack to get out of the mile run. Ms. Grant's face lit up like Christmas morning. See? Even your own brother knows you're manipulating everyone. She reached behind her and twisted the deadbolt on the door before walking over to the windows. Click. She threw them all open. Fresh air and willpower. That's all you need. I doubled over, coughing. Please! Emma was crying now. Just let them use their inhalers. What if something happens? The only thing happening is a lesson in honesty. Mike stood up, ready to ram his way through the door. I'm getting out of here. He headed for the door. Grant didn't even move from her desk throne. Try it. You'll be expelled before you reach the handle. My ribs ached from the effort of breathing. That's when Aiden tried to secretly record on his phone. But Grant had teacher radar. She grabbed it and suddenly all the lights went off. Pitch black. Now you can't collaborate on your lies anymore. In the darkness, the panic hit full force. Multiple people were banging on their desks. Let us out! That was Jason. This isn't legal! Rebecca's voice, shrill with fear. Someone knocked on the door. Mr. Wang's voice came through muffled. Everything okay in there? Half the class screamed, no! Help us! She won't let us leave! Grant cracked the door just enough to stick her head out, using her body to muffle our cries. Just doing some dramatic reading. The lights are off for the atmosphere. I heard his footsteps fade away. You're all getting suspended! Grant roared. In the darkness, I heard her pull out a thermos. Real healing, she whispered to herself. I heard her fumbling around, knocking into desks. Someone yelped when she stepped on their foot. Where are you? She muttered. I tried to slide out of my chair quietly, but my wheeze gave me away. There you are. A hand landed on my shoulder, fingernails digging in. Drink this. It'll open your airways. I tried to resist, but I was already weak, dizzy from lack of air. Hot liquid poured into my mouth, burning, scalding. I screamed and choked. The mint mixed with my swollen throat triggered a coughing fit so violent I thought my ribs would crack. The lights flicked back on. My lips felt thick and numb. 3 girls were surrounding me, trying to help me sit up. You're insane! Katie screamed. They're dying! Something warm and metallic filled my mouth. Blood. Soon it was spotted all over my desk. Marcus was coughing blood too. Lily was barely conscious, making these tiny gasping sounds like a fish out of water. Anyone who makes a sound gets 2 weeks detention, but nobody cared about detention anymore. Sarah was sobbing, kneeling next to Marcus. Please wake up, please wake up. Emma was going through everyone's bags, desperate for any medication. That's when it happened. Marcus, who'd been fighting the hardest, just stopped. He wasn't breathing. The class lost it. Even my twin Jake was shaking Marcus, slapping his face. Wake up! Wake up! At that point, my body wasn't mine anymore. I felt myself grab my history textbook, the thick one. I looked up at the ceiling. The sprinkler head hung there like a target. I pulled back and launched it with everything left in me. Crack! Water poured down on everyone. She scrambled toward me but slipped on the wet floor. You little! The fire alarm brought everyone running. Mr. Wang was back, pounding on the door. Open up! Fire evacuation! Grant was on the floor, soaked and screaming. The key had fallen from her pocket. I collapsed in the hallway. The cold tile felt so good against my burning face. Someone shoved an inhaler in my hand. The paramedics worked on Marcus for 20 minutes. Electric shocks that made his whole body jump. They pulled a white sheet over Marcus's face. He didn't make it. We all glared at each other with only one thought in mind. Grant had to pay. The paramedics were still packing their equipment when 2 cops showed up. I was sitting on the hallway floor trying to understand that Marcus was actually dead. My throat burned from whatever Grant poured down it, and every breath felt like sandpaper scraping my insides. A detective in a gray suit knelt beside me and asked if I could give a statement. I nodded, but couldn't stop staring at the classroom door where they'd just wheeled Marcus out. The detective helped me stand, and we walked to an empty classroom while other cops took statements from my classmates. He wrote down everything about the locked door and the confiscated inhalers and the scalding liquid she forced down my throat. My voice kept cracking, and I had to use my inhaler 3 times just to get through the story. The ambulance took me and Lily to the hospital while Grant got taken away in a police car. At the hospital that evening, they ran tests on my burned throat and damaged airways. The doctor said the scalding liquid caused second-degree burns in my esophagus. A different detective showed up, and I had to tell the whole story again while nurses checked my oxygen levels. He wrote down every detail about how she dragged her desk to block the door and turned off the lights and wouldn't let Mr. Wang help us. I felt numb and disconnected, like I was watching someone else tell this story. The detective kept asking me to repeat parts, and I had to explain 3 times how she forced the thermos into my mouth. Jake showed up at the hospital with our parents around 9 o'clock. I couldn't even look at him standing there in the doorway. He tried to explain that he didn't mean for things to go that far, and he was just trying to avoid trouble. I told him his need to be the perfect twin got Marcus killed. Mom had to physically separate us when I tried to get out of bed to hit him. Dad took Jake to the waiting room while Mom stayed with me crying and apologizing for not believing me about Grant being crazy. The nurse gave me something for the pain, and I drifted in and out of sleep. By midnight, our class group chat was blowing up my phone. Everyone was sharing their version of what happened, and some people were calling me a hero for triggering the sprinkler. Others said I made things worse by escalating the situation. Katie posted that we all needed to stick together, but I could already see the cracks forming in our unity. Some kids were saying we should have just admitted we were faking to make her happy. Others wanted to organize protests at the school. Rebecca kept posting about how traumatized she was, and Emma was trying to organize counseling sessions. The messages kept coming faster than I could read them. The next morning, an email from the district popped up on my phone. It announced Ms. Grant had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The email used careful legal language about alleged incidents and reviewing protocols, which made me angry. They were already trying to minimize what happened, like it was some minor policy violation instead of murder. Mom read it over my shoulder and started swearing about lawyers and cover-ups. The hospital discharged me that afternoon with prescriptions for my throat and a follow-up appointment. 2 days after Marcus died, the whole school gathered on the football field for a vigil. I stood in the back with my parents trying not to cry. Marcus's mom spoke through tears about her son's love of music and and how he'd been accepted to 3 colleges. When she mentioned his asthma and how careful he always was with his inhaler, several students started crying. She looked right at me when she talked about the heroes who tried to save him. The principal gave a speech about healing and coming together, but nobody was really listening. After the vigil, Aiden pulled me aside behind the bleachers. He told me he checked his phone's cloud storage, but the video wasn't there. The phone was in airplane mode when Grant took it, so nothing uploaded. We both knew this meant it was our word against hers, and she'd probably get some fancy lawyer. He showed me his phone settings, and the last backup was from the day before the incident. That night, I had my first major asthma attack since the incident. The sirens from the emergency vehicles at the vigil triggered it, and I couldn't breathe. I used my inhaler over and over, but it wasn't working, and I kept thinking I'd end up like Marcus. My chest got tighter and tighter until I couldn't even stand up. My parents found me on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, gasping and crying. They wanted to call an ambulance, but I begged them not to because I couldn't handle more sirens. Dad sat with me for 2 hours doing breathing exercises until my lungs finally opened up. Returning to the school on day 4 felt surreal. Walking into first period and seeing Marcus's empty desk made everything real again. Someone had left flowers on it, but the janitor came in and removed them, saying it was a safety hazard. Rebecca started crying and had to leave class. I'm curious why the principal's using such careful language about Grant being on administrative leave when a student actually died. Seems like the school district's already thinking about protecting themselves legally instead of dealing with what really happened in that classroom. The substitute teacher tried to act normal but kept glancing at the empty desk. Nobody wanted to sit near it like death was contagious. Kids whispered about lawyers and lawsuits and whether Grant would go to prison. A union representative showed up in the teacher's lounge that morning. Word spread fast that all teachers had been told not to discuss the incident with students or media. Mr. Wang wouldn't even make eye contact with me in the hallway, and when I tried to talk to him, he just walked faster. The wall of silence made me feel even more isolated, like the whole school was pretending nothing happened. Other teachers suddenly got busy with papers whenever any of us from that class walked by. The counselor's office was packed, but she could only repeat the same useless phrases about processing grief. Nobody wanted to admit they'd all ignored the warning signs about Grant. Everyone just wanted to move on and pretend a kid didn't die in English class. By day 5, the whispers started spreading through the hallways like poison. Kids from other classes kept coming up to me saying they heard Grant was telling people she never said asthma was psychological. The worst part was watching teachers nod along when she walked by their classrooms. Mr. Wang avoided eye contact when I passed him in the hall. The art teacher suddenly had urgent paperwork whenever any of us walked near her desk. My chest got so tight with rage I had to sit down on the bathroom floor. After PE that same day, I went to the nurse's office for my inhaler like always. The nurse looked uncomfortable when she opened a brand new locked cabinet with a giant padlock on it. She explained there was a new safety protocol where all inhalers had to stay locked up now. Students needed written permission from parents and doctors just to access their own medication. I actually laughed at the sick joke of it all. The nurse's face went red and she fumbled with the lock while explaining it was for everyone's safety. The irony made my stomach hurt worse than my lungs. That afternoon, I found a note in my locker about a meeting in the library after school. About 20 kids showed up and sat in a circle while Emma stood at the front with a stack of papers. She wanted us to write a collective letter to the school board demanding accountability for what happened. Half the room wanted to be diplomatic and focus on policy changes. The other half wanted to burn the whole system down and name every teacher who ignored us. We spent an hour arguing about whether to use the word murder or incident. Nobody could agree on anything except that Grant needed to pay. People kept raising their voices until the librarian kicked us out. That night at dinner, I asked Jake to sign the letter we'd finally drafted. He pushed his plate away and said his lawyer told him not to put anything in writing about the incident. The word incident made me want to throw my fork at him. He kept eating while explaining how anything he wrote could hurt his college applications. I told him he was a coward and waited for him to argue. He just kept chewing his food and didn't even look up. Mom and Dad sat there in silence like they always did when we fought. The next morning, the announcement came over the intercom about Marcus's funeral on day 6. Within hours, the GoFundMe link was everywhere, raising $30,000 before lunch. Marcus's mom posted a message that made me run to the bathroom to throw up. She wrote that no amount of money would bring back her baby boy. The rawness in her words felt like being punched in the stomach over and over. Kids were crying in the hallways and teachers pretended not to notice. We found out that afternoon that Lily got released from the hospital finally. Her mom posted on social media that Lily had significant lung damage that might never heal. She'd need breathing treatments multiple times a day for months or maybe years. The medical bills were already piling up and her parents were meeting with lawyers. The damage was permanent and real no matter what Grant claimed. By the end of that first week, a local news van showed up outside school. Suddenly our school was trending online for all the worst reasons imaginable. The comment sections turned into war zones with strangers arguing about whether Grant was a monster. Some people called us dramatic teens looking for attention and money. Someone found my full name and posted it in a thread about crisis actors. Messages from strangers started flooding my social media calling me a liar and worse. Dad had to change our phone number after the 3rd death threat. The worst part came when Grant's lawyer started pushing a new story about the confusion. They claimed we couldn't even get the teacher's name right since some kids said Grant and others said Grant. The lawyer used this tiny detail to question every single thing we said about that day. They acted like we were making everything up because of this one confusion. I knew what I heard, but the doubt started creeping in like poison in my veins. Maybe I was remembering wrong, or maybe the lack of oxygen messed with my memory. That's when the paramedic who treated me showed up at our house one evening. He pulled Mom aside and whispered that they were testing the contents of Grant's thermos. He said whatever was in that thermos wasn't just tea based on my symptoms and burns. The information wasn't public yet, but he wanted us to know there might be actual evidence. Mom thanked him with tears running down her face while I felt hope for the first time. The next day, a letter arrived from the teachers union urging all parents to wait for facts. They painted Grant as a dedicated educator with 20 years of perfect service to the community. They talked about her awards and achievements like that erased what she did to us. Dad read it once, then crumpled it up and threw it straight in the trash. Mom pulled it back out and smoothed it flat to keep as evidence for later. The union's support meant Grant would have good lawyers and plenty of people defending her. 3 days later, the school counselor pulled me out of math class and walked me to her office where she had tissues and water bottles set up like she was planning for tears. She sat down across from me with this fake smile and started talking about healing and moving forward, and then dropped the bomb that she wanted to set up a restorative justice circle where I could sit down with Grant and talk about our feelings. I stood up so fast my chair tipped backward and hit the wall. The idea of sitting across from that woman made my stomach turn, and I walked straight out without saying a word while she called after me about unresolved anger. longer. Katie found me in the bathroom 20 minutes later and told me she was organizing a walkout for tomorrow to protest Grant being allowed back once her bail got sorted. She'd already gotten 40 kids to agree, but Mike had cornered her at lunch, warning that anyone who participated could face suspension, and colleges would see it on their records. The group was splitting between kids whose parents would support them and kids who couldn't risk any marks on their transcripts. I wanted to walk out so bad, but Mom had already mentioned she was worried about my grades slipping, and Dad kept talking about keeping a low profile until the legal stuff got sorted. That night, I was scrolling through my phone when a message request popped up from someone named Rhiannon Booth, who said she was a reporter covering education issues. She wrote this long message about how she'd been following what happened and wanted to give students a chance to tell their side since the union was controlling the narrative. She seemed nice enough and mentioned she'd covered other cases where teachers hurt kids, but I remembered how reporters twisted everything after that school shooting 2 towns over. I didn't reply, but I took a screenshot of her profile and saved her contact info just in case. 2 nights later, around 11, my phone buzzed with an anonymous message through some app I'd never heard of saying, "I better watch my back and that snitches get stitches." My hands were shaking as I read it 3 more times, trying to figure out if it was real or just some troll trying to scare me. I screenshotted immediately but didn't wake up my parents because they were already talking about pulling me out of school and homeschooling me for the rest of the year. The next morning, an email from Principal Bentley went out to all families about a listening session scheduled for next week where students and parents could share their concerns in a safe space. The whole email was full of words like healing and moving forward and community strength, but not once did she mention holding anyone accountable or making sure this never happened again. It felt like those corporate apologies companies put out when they get caught doing something bad. Mom printed it out and highlighted all the parts that made her mad, which was basically the whole thing. A week later, we got a call from Prosecutor Portia Barron, who wanted to schedule formal witness statements with all the families. She talked to Mom for 20 minutes, and when Mom hung up, she actually looked hopeful for the first time since everything happened. Barron wanted to meet with each student separately with their parents present, and said what we told her would be crucial for building the criminal case. She was the first person in authority who seemed to actually believe us and want to do something about it. Jake came into my room that night and sat on my bed, which he never does unless something's wrong. He told me Grant's defense attorney, Rosalind Barlow, had called our parents asking if Jake would be willing to testify about times he'd seen me exaggerate my asthma. The fact that they were trying to use my own brother against me again made me want to throw up. Jake said he told them to go to hell, but I could see in his eyes he felt guilty about what he'd said in class that day. What's Grant's lawyer doing digging into whether kids called her Grant or Grant? That seems like such a weird thing to focus on when someone died. The paramedic showing up at their house to whisper about testing the thermos makes me wonder what kind of protocol allows that kind of information sharing. Aiden texted our group chat at midnight saying he just remembered his phone sometimes automatically backs up photos and videos to his laptop when they're on the same Wi-Fi. He was racing home from his cousin's house to check if anything from that day had uploaded before Grant took his phone. He found some corrupted files with timestamps from that morning, but they were all messed up and would take time to recover if it was even possible. It was a thin hope, but better than nothing we had so far. Mom scheduled my first therapy appointment with someone named Sybil Barrera, who specialized in trauma and worked specifically with kids who'd been through school incidents. I sat in her office for the first 20 minutes, unable to say anything while tears just poured down my face. She didn't push or try to make me talk, just sat there with me and handed me tissues, and somehow that helped more than all the people trying to get me to process my feelings. The listening session turned into complete chaos when students started standing up and telling what really happened in that classroom. One teacher actually stood up and stormed out yelling that we were all lying to get attention and destroy a good woman's career. Parents started shouting at each other with one group defending Grant and another group demanding justice, and Principal Bentley completely lost control of the room. Security had to escort 3 parents out when a dad tried to get in another dad's face about calling his kid a liar. Principal Bentley stood at the microphone for 10 whole minutes waiting for everyone to calm down. She kept clearing her throat and tapping the mic, but nobody was listening anymore. Finally, she just started talking over the noise about how the district would look into our policies and procedures. She didn't give any dates or specifics, just kept saying they'd review everything carefully. The words felt empty, like she was reading from a script someone else wrote. By Monday morning, kids started showing up with buttons that had Marcus's school picture on them. Teachers pretended not to notice, but you could see them looking at the buttons when they thought nobody was watching. Emma spent all of lunch that day writing up a petition on her laptop. She wanted a new rule that teachers couldn't lock classroom doors from the inside during school hours ever. By Wednesday, she had over 1,000 signatures from students and parents who printed it out and signed it. She took it to the school board meeting that week where they said they'd consider it, which everyone knew meant they'd ignore it. 3 weeks later, my mom got a call from Prosecutor Portia Barron about the toxicology report on Grant's thermos. The lab found concentrated mint oil and eucalyptus oil mixed together at levels that would cause severe breathing problems in anyone with asthma. Portia said this was evidence of assault since Grant forced me to drink it knowing I had asthma. My stomach turned thinking about how she literally poisoned me on purpose. That same week, Rosalind Barlow, who was Grant's lawyer, started telling reporters that I caused Marcus's death by throwing the textbook at the sprinkler. She said the water and chaos made it impossible for anyone to help Marcus properly, and that made it my fault he died. My hands shook so bad when I read the article that I dropped my phone and cracked the screen. She was trying to make me the villain when Grant was the one who locked us in and took our medicine. Then Rhiannon Booth from the local newspaper published her own article with information nobody knew before. She found 3 other schools where Grant had worked, and parents had complained about her refusing to let kids use inhalers or EpiPens. Each time the district just moved her to a different school instead of firing her or getting her help. People finally started believing us, but it didn't bring Marcus back or make anything better. 5 weeks after everything happened, we got letters saying we needed to give depositions for the investigation. But first, the district wanted us to sign papers for what they called support services, like counseling and tutoring. My parents took the papers to Ramona Ayers, who was a lawyer they found through a friend. She read through everything and told us it was actually an NDA that would stop us from talking about what happened or suing the district. We threw the papers in the trash and never signed them. Marcus's parents hired Ramona too to file a civil case against Grant and the district for wrongful death. She told them the case was strong with all the evidence we had, but warned them the district would fight hard. She said it could take years before anything got resolved in court, which made Marcus's mom cry all over again. Meanwhile, Aiden had been working on those corrupted video files from his phone that Grant grabbed. He couldn't get actual video, but he managed to pull out audio waveforms that showed voices and loud noises from our classroom. You could see the pattern of screaming and banging on the desks even without hearing the actual words. He made copies on 3 different flash drives and gave one to his parents and one to the prosecutor. I started seeing Sybil Barrera twice a week for therapy to deal with the panic attacks that kept hitting me. We practiced breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when I had to talk about what happened in court. She taught me to count 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, and 1 thing I could taste. It helped during the day, but at night I still woke up gasping and checking for my inhaler under my pillow. 6 weeks after the incident, I got called to the principal's office where they told me I was considered for suspension. They said I caused thousands of dollars in water damage by hitting the sprinkler, and that was vandalism of school property. Katie found out and organized other students to stand outside the principal's office with signs saying I saved lives. The local news showed up and interviewed kids who said I was a hero, not a vandal, which made the school back down. But they still sent my parents a bill for the water damage that my dad threw straight in the garbage while muttering about suing them instead. The next morning, over 200 students walked out of class and marched straight to the front steps with signs and chants. News vans pulled up within 20 minutes, and reporters shoved microphones at anyone who would talk about what happened in that classroom. The principal tried to get everyone back inside, but nobody moved. By lunch, the school board announced that 17 students would get 3-day suspensions for participating in the walkout. My stomach twisted into knots watching kids get punished for standing up for us. They kept telling me this was bigger than just me now, but the guilt still ate at me. 2 days later, at our support group meeting in the community center basement, Lily pulled out a folder with her latest test results. Her hands shook as she showed us the numbers showing she'd lost 30% of her lung capacity since that day. The doctor said she'd need breathing treatments and special care for years, maybe even decades. She tried to smile and say she was handling it fine, but we could all see how scared she was behind those brave words. That weekend, Jake got served with a subpoena right at our front door while eating breakfast. He had to go to court and tell everyone how he called me a drama queen and said I faked my attacks to get out of running. The local paper ran it as their main headline with his picture right on the front page. He texted me later saying he was sorry and begging me to respond, but I just deleted it without answering. Some things you can't take back with apologies. Week 7 came fast, and Portia met with us at the courthouse to prep for the grand jury testimony. She warned us that the defense lawyer would try to make us look like liars and troublemakers, but said our evidence was strong enough to win. I practiced my statement over and over in front of the mirror until I could say every word without my voice cracking or tears starting. Meanwhile, Aiden had been working with some tech guy to recover the deleted audio from his phone. They managed to pull out parts where Grant clearly said nobody leaves until you admit you're faking, and that fresh air and willpower was all we needed. The relief hit me so hard my legs went weak and I had to sit down right there in the hallway. But then the defense lawyer filed papers saying the audio was recorded without permission, so it shouldn't count as evidence. The judge would decide if we could use it at trial, and thinking about losing that proof made me want to scream until my throat went raw. Then an anonymous teacher sent an email to the prosecutor's office about other times Grant had forced students to drink her nasty herbal stuff as natural remedies. 3 more kids from previous years came forward saying she'd done the same thing to them when they had headaches or stomach aches. The pattern was clear and getting stronger every day. Portia called us into her office and explained she was going after Grant for child endangerment and involuntary manslaughter charges. The maximum sentence could be 15 years in prison if convicted on all counts. It should have felt like winning, but nothing would bring Marcus back to his family. Then things got really bad when someone posted my home address on some website calling me a liar who killed my friend. Pizza delivery guys started showing up every hour, and then worse stuff like dead flowers and threatening notes in our mailbox. Dad filed a police report, but the cops said they couldn't track who was doing it. Mom started looking at houses in other towns because the harassment was wearing us all down. Every time the doorbell rang, we all jumped, wondering what awful thing was coming next. The stress was making my asthma worse, and I was using my inhaler more than ever. Grant's lawyer claiming I killed Marcus by hitting the sprinkler makes me wonder what kind of twisted logic she's using when Grant literally locked us in and took our medicine. During all this, I had weekly therapy sessions with someone named Sybil who helped me figure out how to live in the same house as Jake without letting the anger eat me alive. She had me write down boundaries like not talking at meals and staying in separate rooms when possible. We made a plan where I could exist in the same space without having to forgive him or pretend things were okay between us. Jake tried to corner me a few times to apologize again, but I just walked away every single time. Mom begged me to give him a chance, but I wasn't ready and didn't know if I ever would be. The trial date got set for 3 months out, and every day felt like walking through mud waiting for it to arrive. I spent the first week just sitting at my computer typing and deleting the same sentence over and over. Finally, I just started writing what happened that day without trying to make it sound good or dramatic. I listed every single thing Grant did from the moment she took my inhaler to when the paramedics arrived. No opinions or feelings, just facts like a police report. I posted it on the local community Facebook page at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. By breakfast, it had 3,000 shares and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters started calling the house and Mom had to unplug the landline. Some news van parked outside our house for 6 hours until Dad went out and told them to leave. I turned down every single interview request because I didn't want to become some kind of victim celebrity. The post kept spreading though, and by the end of the week, even people in other states were talking about it. 2 weeks later, Mom got a call from Portia Barron, the prosecutor handling the case. The grand jury had looked at all the evidence, including my post and Aiden's recording. They voted to indict Grant on charges of involuntary manslaughter and 3 counts of child endangerment. It wasn't the murder charge some people online were demanding, but at least she'd have to go to trial. The arraignment happened on a Tuesday morning, and the courthouse was packed with reporters and protesters. Grant showed up in a black suit looking thinner than before with dark circles under her eyes. When the judge asked how she pleaded, she said, "Not guilty," in this tiny voice I'd never heard from her before. Her lawyer argued for no bail since she wasn't a flight risk and had ties to the community. The judge set bail at $50,000 with conditions that she couldn't go near any schools or contact any witnesses. I watched her walk out of the courthouse surrounded by supporters holding signs that said, "Teachers under attack," and Grant did nothing wrong. Seeing her free while Marcus was in the ground made my stomach turn. The next day I got an email from the school saying they were reversing the suspensions for students who walked out in protest. Everyone except me, because pulling the fire alarm was still considered destruction of property and reckless endangerment. They wanted to make an example of someone, and I was the perfect target. Mom wanted to fight it, but I was too tired to care about missing graduation or having having it on my record. Ramona Ayers, a lawyer who'd been following the case, called and said I might have grounds for a lawsuit since I only pulled the alarm to save lives. I told her I didn't have the energy to fight everyone at once. Meanwhile, the civil suit that Marcus's parents filed was moving forward, and they officially named the school district as a defendant. This triggered something called discovery, which meant lawyers could dig through years of complaints and personnel files. The district's insurance company brought in this whole team of expensive lawyers from the city. Marcus's mom told my mom it was going to get ugly because the district would do anything to avoid paying out millions. A month later, we all had to go to the preliminary hearing where the judge would decide if there was enough evidence for a real trial. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and Grant sat at the defense table staring straight ahead. When the prosecutor played Aiden's recording of Grant refusing to let us leave, you could hear people in the gallery gasping. The toxicology report showed that the liquid she forced me to drink had capsaicin levels that could cause respiratory distress in someone with asthma. Grant's face went white when the judge said all the evidence would be admitted for trial. Her lawyer started arguing that she was just a dedicated teacher who made a tragic mistake trying to help us overcome what she thought was psychological dependence. He kept saying she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing based on her own experience with childhood asthma. The whole narrative made me want to throw up because it painted her as some kind of misguided hero instead of someone who killed a kid. Word started leaking that Grant's lawyers were in plea negotiations with the prosecutor. She might plead guilty to felony child endangerment to avoid going to trial for manslaughter. Marcus's parents were devastated because they wanted her to face the maximum charges. Portia Barron met with them and explained that a plea deal would guarantee some jail time while going to trial risked her getting acquitted completely if the jury bought the misguided teacher story. I got called to meet with Ramona Ayers again about the civil case. She warned me that if I testified about what happened, the district might countersue me for the sprinkler damage. They could claim I acted recklessly and endangered other students by causing water damage and triggering a fire evacuation. The whole thing was exhausting, and I felt like I was punished for trying to save my own life. 2 days before the trial was supposed to start, Grant accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of felony child endangerment with a recommendation for 18 months in county jail. Her teaching license would be suspended, and she'd have to register as a child offender. The judge still had to approve the sentence, but everyone knew it was basically a done deal. 18 months for killing Marcus felt like she was getting away with murder. The sentencing hearing came 2 weeks later, and the courtroom was packed with students and parents all waiting to see what would happen to Grant. The judge listened to the prosecutor explain the plea deal, while Grant sat there in her orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I remembered her being in that classroom. Marcus's mom stood up to read her victim impact statement, and her hands shook as she held the paper describing how her son loved basketball and wanted to be an engineer, and how she had to pick out a coffin for her 15-year-old baby. Everyone in that courtroom was crying except the judge, who just sat there shuffling papers like this was any other Tuesday morning case. He accepted the plea deal without any changes: 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, and mandatory training on medical conditions, which felt like such a joke considering Marcus was dead. The district held a press conference the next day, announcing all these new policies about inhaler access, and how teachers couldn't lock classroom doors anymore, and they stood there acting like heroes for fixing problems they created in the first place. They never admitted any wrongdoing, never said sorry, never even mentioned Marcus by name, just kept calling it the incident, like it was some weather event nobody could have prevented. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn every time I saw their stupid press releases about student safety being their top priority when they'd fought us every step of the way. Settlement talks started for the civil case 3 weeks later, with the district's lawyers offering Marcus's family money, but refusing to admit any fault, because that would open them up to more lawsuits from the rest of us. Marcus's mom told them she didn't want their blood money without an apology, but the lawyers just kept throwing bigger numbers at her while billing hundreds of dollars an hour for these meetings that went nowhere. The negotiations dragged on for months with depositions and mediations, and more lawyers getting rich off our trauma while nothing actually changed. Jake showed up at my locker 4 months after everything happened, standing there with his hands in his pockets, saying he knew sorry wasn't enough, but he wanted to try to rebuild our relationship. I looked at him for a long time, remembering how he called me a drama queen while I was dying, and told him maybe someday, but not yet, because trust doesn't just magically fix itself after someone shows you who they really are. Lily started pulmonary rehabilitation that same week, and her lungs were so damaged she could barely walk to the parking lot without stopping to catch her breath. Emma set up a whole schedule getting different students to drive Lily to her appointments 3 times a week, and we all took turns sitting in those waiting rooms reading old magazines while she did breathing exercises with machines that looked like torture devices. It was the only good thing that came from this nightmare, seeing how we all pulled together to help each other when the adults kept failing us. My suspension for setting off the sprinkler stayed on my permanent record, even after 3 appeals where I explained I was saving lives, but the school board said vandalism is vandalism, and the best they would do was reduce it from 10 days to 3. That mark would follow me to every college application, a permanent reminder that doing the right thing and following the rules are 2 completely different things in their world. Spring came, and with it graduation plans that included an empty chair they would place for Marcus at the ceremony, and his name in the program with a little star next to it. The senior class voted to dedicate our yearbook to him, and his school photo on the memorial page, with that huge smile he always had, broke my heart every single time I saw it. Sybil helping with boundaries for living with Jake sounds reasonable enough, but these lawyers throwing around threats about countersuing for sprinkler damage? They're actually saying saving lives was property destruction worth suing over, while Grant gets 18 months for what she did to Marcus. I sat down at my computer one night to write this final post explaining why I threw that textbook at the sprinkler, and why I'd do it again, even knowing I'd get suspended and have a permanent mark on my record. But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that justice and fairness are 2 different things, and that the system will punish you for saving lives while letting killers get slaps on the wrist. Marcus deserved better than 6 months for his killer. Better than a district that cared more about lawsuits than lives. Better than a brother who called his sister a drama queen while she was dying. Better than empty chairs and yearbook dedications. I'll carry that weight forever, knowing I saved 2 lives but couldn't save the 3rd, knowing I did everything right and still got punished for it, knowing that sometimes the only justice you get is the knowledge that you tried when everyone else just watched. Thanks for hanging out and walking through all this with me today. Kinda wild where the questions take us, right? Appreciate you sticking around and sharing the ride. Take care, and hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.